What if I told you that one of the darkest, most profitable businesses in American history wasn't just built on cotton, but on the forced breeding of human beings? We all know the basic story of slavery, the plantations, and the auctions. But what happened after the United States banned the import of new enslaved Africans in 1808? How did the number of enslaved people explode from 1.1 million to nearly 4 million in just 50 years? Well, they built an industry of people producing more people. After the United States closed its doors to the transatlantic slave trade in 1808, a massive economic problem emerged for plantation owners in the Deep South. The demand for cotton was exploding thanks to the invention of the cotton gin, but the legal supply of new enslaved laborers had been cut off. So, the states of the Upper South, like Virginia and Maryland, found a new, devastatingly profitable cash crop, breeding human beings for sale to the Deep South. To make this system work, enslavers used language that stripped away humanity. They didn't say mothers and fathers. They used terms for livestock, such as breeders, broodmares, and stockmen. By using these terms, they psychologically distanced themselves from the horrific reality of their actions. They even rented out strong, obedient men from other plantations specifically for this purpose. The story of a man named Pata Seca shows how far this went. Pata Seca was a black man who stood out due to his incredible height, obedience, and strong physique. His owner saw him not as a person, but as perfect breeding material. His entire life was reduced to one purpose. He was forced to sleep with hundreds of enslaved women across different plantations. Every day, he was taken to different women, with no choice in the matter. He could never say no to his owner. Historical records suggest he fathered over 200 children through this forced system. Even individuals had no say in choosing a partner. The enslaver would point to a man and a woman and assign them as a couple. One enslaved man, Sam Everett, described a deeply invasive practice. If a couple seemed hesitant about the partnership chosen for them, the enslaver, a man called Big Jim, would force them to be together in his presence. He would even turn this into a spectacle for his friends to watch. Historians Ned and Constance Sublette have a powerful term for this. They call it the capitalized womb. What does that mean? It means that an enslaved woman's body and her potential to have children was treated like a living, breathing bank account. Each child she bore was not just a new life. It was a new financial asset, a new piece of property that increased her owner's wealth. Her womb was a factory for producing more human capital. In fact, because of the potential for reproduction, the average price of an enslaved female was often higher than that of a male, up until the age of puberty. To understand how big this business was, let's look at the numbers. By 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, the total estimated value of all enslaved people in the United States was a staggering $4 billion. To put that in perspective, that was more money than was invested in all of America's railroads and factories combined. It was more than all the gold and silver circulating in the entire country. This meant that the single most valuable financial asset in the entire American economy wasn't a thing, it was people. An economic study of thousands of enslaved people found that on farms and plantations geared toward this breeding, the number of women vastly outnumbered the number of men, sometimes by a ratio of more than 2 to 1, especially in slave-exporting states like Virginia. This business model dictated a woman's entire life, from childhood to old age. Girls aged 12 to 15 were considered particularly valuable within this trade network. Why? Because they had their entire reproductive lives ahead of them. They could be put to work in the fields immediately, while also being expected to begin bearing children. The system was designed to push them to have as many children as possible, as quickly as possible. Historical records show enslavers openly bragging about their success in this regard. In one documented example, a slave owner wrote proudly of a 22-year-old woman who was already the mother of 7 children, and a 19-year-old who had 4. He sold them together as a proven breeding pair, their monetary value calculated directly from their demonstrated fertility. So, what was the daily reality for the women and children trapped in this system of forced breeding? First, we have to understand that for an enslaved woman, the law offered no protection. Rape was not considered a crime if the victim was enslaved. The heartbreaking story of a young woman named Celia makes this chillingly clear. In 1850, a Missouri farmer named Robert Newsom took ownership of a 14-year-old girl named Celia. Historical accounts indicate that she was mistreated during the journey to his farm. Over the next 5 years, she endured continuous suffering and had at least 2 of his children. At 19, while expecting another child and feeling desperate, she defended herself when he tried to harm her, resulting in his death. Celia was arrested and charged with murder. During her trial, her lawyer argued that she had acted in self-defense, but the court ruled that under the laws of that time, she had no legal protection. She was found guilty and executed. Faced with this absolute lack of control, women fought back in the only ways they could. Their resistance was a silent war for bodily autonomy. They used ancient herbal knowledge, passed secretly from woman to woman, to end pregnancies. They used substances like cotton root, which was known to induce miscarriages, as one formerly enslaved woman, Lou Lee, recalled decades later. In them days, the turpentine was strong, and 10 or 12 drops would miscarry you. But the makers found what it was used for, and they changed the way of making turpentine. It ain't no good no more. Other women would cleverly feign illness or even miscarriage to get a temporary reprieve from the back-breaking work in the fields. If a woman was caught trying to hide a pregnancy or a newborn, the punishment was savage. She could be brutally whipped, or she and her child would be sold off to different owners as a warning to others. Even pregnancy itself offered no protection from violence. To protect their financial investment, the baby in her womb, enslavers used a horrific method of punishment. A pregnant woman would be forced to lie face down in a hole dug in the ground. This way, her swollen belly was protected while the whip lashed the bare skin of her back. And in the most tragic of circumstances, some mothers saw death as the only escape for their children from the horrors of slavery. The most famous case is that of Margaret Garner. In 1856, when she and her family were captured by slave catchers under the Fugitive Slave Act, Margaret made a choice no mother should ever have to make. She took the life of her own 2-year-old daughter and tried to kill her other children, rather than see them return to slavery. When they subdued her, she reportedly said, "The child is dead. Now I know it will never know the suffering I have known." And what about the children? Specifically, the light-skinned sons and daughters, whose faces often bore a haunting resemblance to their white enslavers, and sometimes to the men who owned them. These children were living, breathing evidence of the violence. Yet they were granted no privilege, no kindness, and no acknowledgement from their white fathers. A slave woman, Harriet Jacobs, wrote about the constant pressure enslaved women faced. She revealed that her master was the father of 11 enslaved children, a fact that no one was allowed to speak about openly for fear of severe punishment. The law was very clear on their status. A legal doctrine known as partus sequitur ventrum meant that a child's status as free or enslaved followed the mother. So, even if a slave owner was the biological father, his child was considered his property, not his family. And mostly, the light-skinned girls are sold as prostitutes. Let's zoom out for a second. How do you run a business this brutally? Slave owners had to convince themselves they were savvy businessmen, not monsters. So, they created a playbook. They followed guides that literally gave them tips on how to get more enslaved children. One famous manual by a man named Thomas R. Down advised fellow enslavers to offer rewards. Imagine this. A woman was promised a new dress if she had 6 children. It was a twisted system of bonuses and incentives, turning the miracle of birth into a production quota. Formerly enslaved William J. Anderson remembered this, writing that his enslaver would pay a woman $25 for every child she had. In 1792, an enslaver named B. Talbert made a business proposition to an enslaved woman named Jenny. He promised to free her and her sixth child if she had 5 children for him. This business mindset even bled into early medicine. In the Caribbean, a doctor named John Quier did something unthinkable in the 1760s. He was curious about smallpox vaccines, so he used entire plantations of enslaved people as his lab rats. He experimented on pregnant women, infants, and the sick without their consent, just to see how the vaccine would work under different conditions. Their well-being was secondary to the data. Now, here's where it gets controversial, even among historians. Some researchers look at the numbers and say, "See, it was just economics. They encouraged big families." They argue there wasn't a formal, nationwide breeding program. But I want to know what you think. When does encouragement become coercion? If a woman is offered a new dress for having a child, she had no choice in conceiving. Is that really an incentive? Or is it just a different form of control? How is this history still influencing us today? We see the debates about reparations, about economic inequality. Do you think the fact that Black women's wombs were America's first savings account has anything to do with the wealth gap we see now? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is a sensitive topic, and people hold diverse and strong perspectives. We really want to hear from you. If you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, help us keep doing this work. Hit that like button if you learned something today, and subscribe to the channel for more unfiltered history. Your support helps bring these crucial stories into the light. Thanks for watching.